All right. So we have this is the last topic that we in intermediate algebra are going to cover. Um, it's all about something called the quadratic formula and discriminants. We'll get into that a little bit, but really, these last two videos will cover a technique of solving quadratic equations that works in every situation ever. So if you ever find yourself unsure of how to solve a problem, but you have this technique or skill down, this will work every time. So it's super helpful. Before we actually get to solving, that's what the second video is about. Today we're just going to look at kind of the first step in that process and how we can set ourselves up for success. Because the equation I'm going to show you in the next video is pretty lengthy, but we're going to kind of break it down today. So, for instance, this equation in the previous video we talked about solving by factoring. Something like this cannot be factored. There's no way you'd have to do the AC method and find two numbers and multiply -14 and add -8, and that doesn't exist. So there's no way to factor this, and you also can't solve by square roots, but that doesn't mean we can't solve it. It just means that the techniques that we've learned so far won't work. So when we solve by square roots and when we solve by factoring, there was almost always two solutions. But there are equations that exist where there are no solutions at all. And so one thing that can help us to determine if there are solutions and if so, how many of them there are, is by finding what's called the discriminant. Okay. And if you remember in a quadratic equation, we labeled the numbers in front of x squared. The number in front of x squared is a, the number in front of just plain x is b, and the number by itself is c. So that includes the minus sign or the plus sign in front of it, but that does not include the variable x at all. So by using a, b, and c, we're going to find what's called the discriminant. And that will allow us to figure out how many solutions there are to an equation. And to find the discriminant, we're going to do this calculation right here. You're going to see this a bunch. This is super important when it comes to solving quadratic equations. B squared minus 4AC. Okay. Now it seems like a lot. The letter D I just used to shorthand for discriminant. So to find the discriminant, we are going to do the calculation b squared minus 4ac using the numbers from the equation. So let's take a look at how that works using this exact same equation. Here's the setup that I really like to do because it helps me stay organized. There's a lot of numbers you're going to be plugging in, and you can just individually plug all these things in, but it requires a lot of parentheses. So here's how I like to do it. We just saw that A is 2, B is -8, and C is -7. So I'm going to go ahead and write those numbers down on this side here. 2, -8, and -7. Now, what I am going to do is I'm going to do two more calculations, and this will help me to make the discriminant very easy. What is B squared? And what is A times C? And that's what these final two pieces are down here. So to take a number squared, remember that means to multiply by itself. And what's super important here is that if you just type -8 squared in the calculator, it'll tell you -64 because you didn't put it in parentheses. But really in your brain, you should say, anytime I square a number, positive times positive or negative times negative, my answer should be positive. And so if I manually type in -8 times -8, it'll tell me it's positive 64. Or if I really want to use the squared button, I need to put the -8 in parentheses. Okay, so either way, b squared is 64. And then just like we would have done if we were factoring it, I'm just going to multiply a and c together. I'm just going to multiply 2 times -7. If I multiply 2 and -7, that gives me -14. Okay. Now, with those two calculations done on the side, the discriminant of b squared minus 4ac, now this 4 is part of the formula. It's part of the equation always. And where the equation comes from. If you really care, you can find proofs and where the 4 comes from somewhere else on YouTube. But just understand that 4 will always be there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace this with 64, and I'm going to replace AC with negative 14. So when I go to my calculator, it looks like this: 64 minus 4 times AC, which is negative 14. Okay. I'm going to type it in exactly as that looks. Now, I have to use the minus button first and then the negative button second, so be careful with that. But the discriminant value for this is 120. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about what that means in a minute. 120 is not the solution. Okay. It is a number we will use to find the solution in the next video. But the discriminant value being 120 does not mean the answer is 120, and it also does not mean there's 120 answers. Okay. For now, just be okay with, okay, I have this number. I'm not sure what to do with it yet, but we'll come back to it. Let's try it again. Okay. This repetition is so important with this stuff because it is so, once we show you the entire quadratic formula, it is super, intimidating, but it doesn't have to be intimidating if you just kind of break it down. So here I have my A value of 3, negative 7 shows up again, but now it's my B value, and my C is 9. So here I have 3, negative 7, and positive 9. So now if I were to take B squared, that means I'm going to take negative 7 times negative 7, which is going to be positive 49. And then if I were to multiply A times C, 3 times 9, that's 27. So now again, to find my discriminant, it's B squared minus 4AC. Well, B squared is 49. AC is 27. So that's what I'm going to type in my calculator. 49 minus 4 times 27. So my discriminant is negative 59. Okay, again, that's not one of the answers. That's not how many answers there are. We're going to talk in just a moment about what that number means. Just understand that the discriminant value is negative 59 for this equation. Okay. Now, here's the piece that we can kind of talk about the previous. Move my face out of here real quick. Here's what the discriminant means. Okay. The discriminant tells us how many solutions there are. It just doesn't tell us what the solutions are. If your discriminant is positive, any positive number, 1, 350, anything that's a positive number, that means your answer or your equation has 2 solutions, just like most of the equations that we've been looking at. Most of them have had 2 answers. And that is true anytime the discriminant is positive, you will have 2 solutions. Okay. If the discriminant somehow comes out to be exactly 0, if you do B squared minus 4AC and you get 0 as the discriminant, that means there is only one solution to the answer, or to that equation. There's only one answer that you are looking for. Okay. And then finally, if your discriminant is negative, that means there is no solution to that equation. It cannot be solved. It is not possible to equal 0. So a negative discriminant means that there are no solutions. Now, this is super helpful because if I get a negative discriminant, I don't have to go any further in the process because I know there are no solutions. Okay, and just to reminder, if you don't have it already in your brain by now, that discriminant is B squared minus 4AC. Okay, so if I were to go back, let's go back real quick and look, okay, at the 2 examples that we've done so far today. Here, my discriminant is 120, which means that there are 2 solutions. There are going to be 2 answers to this equation. 120 is not one of the answers. Okay. We're going to, in the next video, we'll talk about how do you find those two solutions. But here, if you get in an equation that has a discriminant of something like negative 59, there are no solutions. You do not have to keep doing work. You can stop and say there are no solutions. Okay. So that's how we're going to use the discriminant to help guide us right here. This is the summary. Okay. I'm not going to do a summary for this video. The summary is this slide. 2 solutions, 1 solution, no solutions, and it's b squared minus 4ac. So go ahead and give this discriminant a try. See if you can figure out how many solutions there will be, and then we'll wrap this up. So a value is negative 3, b value is positive 11, c value is negative 4. Negative 3. I should mention again, I can't write these numbers down unless I have equals 0 over here. I haven't been very careful with checking that it's equals 0, but make sure that the equation does have equals 0 before you start writing down a, b, c, and so on. So here, b squared is going to be 11 times 11, which is 121. And then ac is negative 3 times negative 4, which would be positive 12. So to find the discriminant, which again, repetition, b squared minus 4ac. It's 121 minus 4 times 12. And now I can type that in the calculator, 121 minus 4 parentheses 12. And I get 73. A positive discriminant means that there will be 2 solutions. I do not know what they are yet. That's the next video. But there are going to be 2 answers to this equation. Okay. So that's the discriminant. It's what it tells us about a quadratic equation. Tune in next time to 2 slides up. And we'll figure out how to actually find the solutions in just a moment.